Hi, my name is Ben Stuck, and I'm here just to give you a brief overview of what I kind of researched and what I focused on for my fall 2020 CURS grant project. So I just have a really quick PowerPoint presentation I'll run through here. I should give you an idea of kind of how I approached the CURS project itself and kind of what the process looks like in my experience with this organization. So I'll get this PowerPoint pulled up here. And we'll start from the beginning. So, as I just mentioned, this is for the fall 2020 CURS Research Grant. And initially going into this, I decided to focus on, long story short, on this scholarly question that I presented with the help of my mentor. And we created this scholarly question of to what extent do current racial attitudes in Toledo, Ohio reflect the legacy of the war on drugs? And like I said, the foremost important aspect of my research is I wanted to kind of, to the best of my ability, properly understand the current racial attitudes present in Toledo, Ohio. And then after I kind of have an idea of what's going on, I wanted to kind of study its correlation to the legacy of the war on drugs. So I'll talk about this a little more through my presentation and why I focused on this aspect in the first place. So the background of the project, I actually have a pretty expansive background as far as why I even decided to do a CURS grant project. And it actually dates all the way back to fall of 2019. So we're going back almost 2 years, about a year and a half. And the research that I stemmed, or the research that I completed for the CURS grant project initially stemmed from a class project I completed in a fall of 2019 in a historiography class. Actually, I had a professor, Dr. Schumann, who also served as my mentor for this project. So I want to give him a huge shout out. He really helped me along the way throughout this CURS grant research project, and just an all around fantastic guy and a fantastic professor. So throughout his class, I was really fascinated about the possibility of completing a school project and focusing on the war on drugs. It's a topic I've been interested in ever since high school. And I wanted to look at it from a historical lens, historical viewpoint and perspective. And I decided to pursue this topic in Dr. Schumann's historiography class. And as my project started to progress throughout the fall semester of 2019, I started to narrow down my research and I started to focus on policy reformation regarding the legalization status of cannabis in the United States. It's a topic that has really in recent years come to light. It's being discussed a lot more. So that's where I started to initially focus on throughout my work and throughout my project in the fall of 2019. So throughout this wonderful historiography class, Dr. Schumann, he encouraged me and he honestly inspired me to look beyond the scope of the class. He said, I can continue on my research that I conducted in historiography class and the project I completed and take it beyond the semester. And he said that he would happily assist me throughout the process and be there every step of the way that I needed. And he was, like I said, I can't thank him enough for all the hard work and all the time he dedicated to helping me complete this project. And after talking with him quite a bit, we collectively just decided that the best avenue to kind of pursue as far as continuing my research past his class was through a CURS grant project. So once we decided on this, we had to create a scholarly question, right? And I was initially kind of looking at the war on drugs from a historical perspective in Dr. Schumann's class. But going into the spring semester of 2020, I kind of shifted gears and started looking more into the political science aspect of policy reformation as far as the war on drugs goes. And I actually consulted with a professor from the political science department at BGSU. She was extremely helpful in helping me develop a new and kind of new and improved perspective on this topic, and actually helped me create a research topic for the spring 2020 semester. So I created a scholarly question for about a year ago for the spring 2020 semester. And I wanted to analyze how the decriminalization of cannabis impacted incarceration rates in Toledo, Ohio. So I knew from the start I wanted to focus on Toledo, Ohio. That's kind of where I wanted to conduct my research at and around. Just kind of keep it within the local community here in BG, but also the Perrysburg, Maumee, Toledo area. And at this time in early spring, a little over a year ago, I thought a really great scholarly question, and I was ready to try to pursue the CURS research grant. Now, unfortunately, just like for everybody, when COVID-19, of course, it's still ongoing, but when it first started out, last year, I kind of put this project on hold and the unprecedented events of COVID-19 on the following months of the spring, and with kind of just a fresh incidence of racial violence that was occurring throughout that summer, I decided I really wanted to alter my research topic and change courses once again. So, like I said, COVID-19 kind of put a pause on my research, and once we had all these incidents of racial violence kind of coming to light and kind of being in the news everywhere, I really wanted to take a different approach with my research. So, as the COVID-19 pandemic kind of unfolded and the calls for racial justice unfolded as well, I decided to formulate yet another research topic with the help of my prior historiography professor and with the help of Dr. Schumann. We created another scholarly question, which is the one that we saw in the very first slide of this presentation, and is to what extent do current racial attitudes in Toledo, Ohio, reflect the legacy of the war on drugs? So once again, I wanted to focus on Toledo, Ohio. I wanted to focus on the legacy of the war on drugs. Like I said, it's a topic that I'm extremely interested in. It's a topic I researched throughout all of fall of 2019 for my historiography class. But with everything that was happening throughout the summer and the past year, I thought it was only appropriate to kind of connect my topic with, like I said, the current racial attitudes that are being present, not just in Toledo, Ohio, but just throughout the country as well. So now that I have my scholarly question created, thanks to the help of Dr. Schumann, I thought that I could possibly really have a great opportunity to provide valuable insights on the current racial attitudes and the lasting impacts of the war on drugs that is present in our local communities like Toledo. So in the summer of 2020, I applied for a CURS grant, and I was fortunate and thankful enough that I received the grant, and I was ready to officially begin my research in the following fall months. So I know it's kind of a lot there, just leading up to this project, but it's been a long journey. Like I said, I technically started my research, like I said, over about a year and a half ago in the fall of 2019. And it wasn't until about a year later where I officially received a CURS grant and officially started this research. So it's been definitely a very exciting journey for me, and it's been a wonderful experience. So talk about the actual research I conducted throughout this project. So what I did is I completed several interviews with residents either in or around the Toledo, Ohio area. And the purpose of this was I wanted to search for insights stemming from first-person accounts. It's really important to me. I really wanted to hear from people that had experiences that were open and willing to share them with me. And I wanted to, like I said, hear people's accounts regarding the current racial attitudes present in the region. Now, whether or not these people experienced or whether they experienced personally any racial type of events or occurrences in their life, whether they did or not, that's stories I wanted to hear from them. Right, I wanted to kind of gain some personal insight from people that live in the area, and that could kind of provide me with a little insight and feedback as to what the current racial attitudes are in Toledo, Ohio. So, in addition to the interviews I conducted, I actually conducted about 24. Some were more in depth, some were very brief, and I actually had some very meaningful and very deep conversations with some people I knew, some people I didn't know, and that's something I'll talk about coming up in a few slides later on in the presentation here. But along with these interviews I conducted, I also obtained a ton of information through archives and locally recorded moments of history that really aided me in my research. So I used the research I conducted in my historiography class and throughout the past year and a half to really kind of put together this little project here. And going into this research, I fully expected to answer my research question and just to really discover the extent to which the legacy of the war on drugs reflects the historically current racial attitudes that we have been observing throughout 2020, focusing specifically on Toledo, Ohio, once this research was completed. So that's my end goal here. So like I said, I gathered numerous first-person accounts through lots of different methods. A few of them were in person, my interviews, but of course, with COVID-19, that was kind of limited. So I had some emails going past back and forth, some text messages with people I either knew or I was familiar with. So there's lots of different avenues I approached as far as getting these accounts. And what I did is I actually I kind of looked at the transcripts I created based on the interviews I conducted, and I was pretty surprised by some of the things I discovered. So, an overwhelming number of my participants believed that the current racial attitudes present in Toledo, Ohio, that they do in fact strongly reflect upon the legacy of the war on drugs. And like I said, I did about 2 dozen interviews, and out of these 2 dozen interviews, the participants, 83% of them strongly agreed with the racial attitudes, or they strongly agreed that the racial attitudes in Toledo, Ohio, they can be directly and or indirectly contributed in part to the legacy of the war on drugs. So they weren't all in, they weren't all in agreement that it was, directly a result. The war on drugs was a direct result to the racial attitudes present in Toledo, Ohio. But like I said, an alarming amount, 83% of my participants said that they believed that the war on drugs was either directly or indirectly, so to some extent, it was involved in contributing in part to the legacy of the war on drugs. So an overwhelming majority of my participants saw a very strong, really strong correlation, whether if it was, like I said, direct or indirect, a really strong correlation between the war on drugs and the racial attitudes we are seeing right now in Toledo, Ohio. On top of this, nearly 62% of my participants, they believe that the legacy of the war on drugs and its correlation to current racial attitudes, they said that it could be observed throughout the region through societal stereotypes that are often imposed upon people of color. Now, this is something I honestly did not really think too much about going into this research project. I was focusing on the war on drugs and the racial tensions or the racial attitudes present in the area. Of course, there's going to be social stereotypes that are involved, as there typically is. But I was kind of blown away by what some of my participants had to say about these societal stereotypes that are present. And really a lot of my participants, so especially the ones that were people of color, they said that they were recipients of these imposed stereotypes, which are brought upon by the war on drugs more than once throughout their lives. And they kind of made the connection saying that they believe that this is directly correlated and related to the racial attitudes perceived in the region. So, like I said, a lot of participants I interviewed, they said, I've experienced these stereotypes. And I think that there is a strong correlation between the war on drugs and these stereotypes, and of course, these racial attitudes that we are seeing in Toledo, Ohio. So, taking an even deeper dive into my research and the results here. So, kind of once I finished all my interviews, I took a look at my data. Going into really the very end of the fall semester, and I was taking a look at everything. Based upon all my findings that derived from the data collected from, like I said, about the 2 dozen interviews I conducted, I feel like I can confidently state that the general census, at least from the research I conducted, that the general census collected from my research, it supports the claim that the current racial attitudes present in Toledo, Ohio, strongly reflects upon the legacy of the war on drugs, both directly and indirectly. So, like I said, I think this supports the claim. I can't confidently say that it's that it's guaranteed. And like I said, I'll talk about that coming up here in the next slide. But a lot of this can be observed through the societal stereotypes imposed upon minorities. And like I said, I think it's pretty evident that a lot of these stereotypes are resulting from this decades of government-induced policies imposed by the war on drugs, which is basically something I really focused on over this past a year and a half through my research. So real quick, before I kind of summarize my final thoughts, here are a few really notable quotes that I pulled from my interviews, some that really stuck with me. So I had my seventh participant, who of course is going to remain anonymous. I made sure that all of my interviewees knew that the conversation I had between them would remain confidential, that their identity would remain anonymous, because I wanted real information. I wanted, I wanted to have a real conversation, and I wanted that raw emotion just to really see kind of what was going on in these people's lives, as far as the racial attitudes present in the area and the possible correlation with the war on drugs. So my participant number 7, he said, I've faced plenty of stereotypes in my life, along with blatant racism. I feel like the connection between these two stereotypes and the war on drugs, it's something that's often overlooked. And I have my participant number 12. He said, it was really hard for me. when my father passed away from a drug overdose. There's so much stigma tied to it that I feel like people who didn't really know him focused more on that instead of who he was as a person. He was a great man. That was a really deep and really personal conversation I had with my participants there. And it really kind of helped me gain some insight specifically on the impact that the war on drugs continues to have in our local communities. And this last quote here, one of my participants said, I would strongly agree that the war on drugs is a strong contributing factor to the racial attitudes we've seen all across the country. It's done nothing but add fuel to the fire for decades. That's something I couldn't say better myself. After I kind of gathered all my research and looked at everything I had completed, I think that's a great way to put it. The war on drugs has done nothing but add fuel to the fire for decades. I thought that was a really fascinating quote that I decided to pull and kind of put into this presentation here. So, as I kind of very briefly talked about on the two slides back, as far as what the future of my research goes and kind of my final thoughts here. So, despite my findings, I believe that I would have to conduct further research with a much larger pool of participants to verify my findings and also to elaborate on the patterns I observed from my participants' given statements. So, as I said here, right, from the research I conducted, from the information I gained and I kind of gathered, I would say, I can confidently state that based on the research I conducted, that it all supports the claim, right? It supports the claim that the current racial attitudes present in Toledo, Ohio, that it does in fact reflect upon the legacy of the war on drugs, and it does so strongly based on the research I conducted. But like I said, this supports the claim. I can't say for sure it's guaranteed that it's the case. Like I said, I feel like I need to conduct more research with a much larger pool of people. Um, Initially, going into this project in the fall 2020 semester, I actually had plans of handing out, honestly, hundreds of surveys to people in the Toledo area, to people in the BG area, especially students. I was going to have lots of people fill out surveys, and then out of those people who filled out surveys, if they chose to do so, I would have an incentive and pull some of those participants to conduct one-on-one interviews with them. And unfortunately, I'm actually a student teacher, so I was kind of tight on time throughout the project as my student teaching duties became pretty extensive throughout the fall 2020 semester. But instead of handing out all those surveys, I decided just to kind of jump straight to the interviews. And like I said, from the 2 dozen I conducted, they went extremely well. I was really pleased with the information I gathered. It was a very humbling experience as well. But like I said, I think more research definitely needs to be done on this topic, whether if it's me or someone else who decides to kind of take a look at this. It's so fascinating. There's so much to learn here. And conducting future research with the intent of collecting more varied data. Like I said, I need more participants. I need more time. I need, honestly, I believe another opportunity to kind of, like I said, just give out more surveys to a more varied and a wider, diverse group of people. And like I said, the more people, the merrier. So I think if I did this, this would provide me with the insight I need to confirm my findings. Once again, based on my findings, I think it supports my scholarly created question, but I can't say it confirms it, right? I can't guarantee that, but I do believe it supports it. And this would also, further in research, would probably elaborate on the exact extent that current racial attitudes in Toledo, Ohio reflect upon the legacy of the war on drugs, as discussed by my numerous participants. So here's just a couple slides of sources I went through. I had several more sources. These are just a handful of the ones I kind of looked at here. And like I said, this was an extremely humbling experience. I am extremely grateful as I switch out of this PowerPoint here. I am extremely grateful for this opportunity presented to me by CURS, by this organization. It's a great way for students to kind of get their voice out there, right? To kind of take, at least with my opportunity, take something I was working on throughout a class project, and continue it past the semester. And I also like to give a huge shout out and a big thank you to Dr. Schumann of the History Department here at Bowling Green State University. The research I conducted here throughout this project, I couldn't have been done without his help. And he's a great professor and a great guy overall. And like I said, I really can't thank him enough. So that's kind of my research summed up in about 20 minutes. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I learned a lot personally, and I really look forward to the next research opportunity that is presented to me.